Hey y'all, Pops here. Well, I know it's been a long time since I've got the old writing down on paper, but I am happy to report that we have not given up on the book, and we have now got the next chapter ready for all of you to be able to listen to. So, if you need to review the first 5 chapters, please note they are available here on my YouTube channel. Probably be quickest to search them by typing in Storytime with Pops, and you'll be able to find them that way. You should be able to find all 5. So without further ado, here is chapter 6. Roan remained in the doorway of the cell, staring but not seeing the 4 piles of ash that had once been loyal members of his guard. The stench of burning orc flesh hung heavily in the air within the confines of the small cell. Yet Roan, consumed by rage, failed to sense it. Stepping into the interior of the small cell, Roan stood in the center, his eyes scanning first the walls and then the floor of the cell, searching for the hidden magical ruins necessary to the completion of the spell which had transported the orcs into the keep. His eyes failing to reveal that which he sought, he reached into one of the many pouches that hung from the leather belt circled about his waist and withdrew a handful of fine sand. Tossing the sand in the air, he quickly recited the incantation required to inject the sand with magical seeking properties. For a second time slowed. The sand hung in the air, acquiring a strange orange glow as it swirled about the cell before descending to one of the bricks which comprised the cell floor. As the sand settled onto the brick, a blue glow emitted from underneath it. Dropping to his knees, Roan reached out his hand and gave the brick a gentle tug, freeing it from the floor. Holding the brick in his hand, he looked down upon the dirt exposed by the removal of the brick. He could discern clearly the magical summoning circle the old man had drawn into the dirt during his confinement. Hurling the brick against the back of the wall, Roan stood up and hurriedly exited the cell, pushing past a small assembly of orcs who stood ready to defend him outside. Racing up the stairs and down the narrow hallways of the keep, Roan returned to his quarters, slamming the door shut behind him and securing it with a magical ward. Settling his thin frame into an oversized wooden chair, he fought to control the anger, rage, and frustration that burned within him, aware now of 2 new emotions which commenced to fester inside of him: fear and panic. Somehow the old man had managed to escape his guards and was now free, plotting the release of the 5 prisoners under the watchful eye of his war party. The old man had to be stopped before he could effect their release. But how? Abandoning the comfort of the chair, Roan rose and began to pace about the room. He needed to think, he needed to act, to gain control of the situation, and he needed to do it now. The war party and their prisoners were camped outside the keep, somewhere in the surrounding countryside, their exact whereabouts unknown. He had anticipated their arrival sometime later in the afternoon. This meant their camp was somewhere close. Patrols would need to be placed along the road to the keep. At some point, the war party would need to leave the forest in its protection, emerging onto the road to reach the keep. He would send 5 patrols of orcs and human mages, stationing them at intervals along the road to strengthen the war party and alert them of the possibility of attempted rescue by the old man. He himself would flee the keep with a small escort to return to his fortress in the mountains. He would find safer sanctuary within those walls in the event the old man successfully freed the prisoners. Having decided on these courses of actions, Roan removed magic ward from the door, dashing down the corridors of the keep, shattering the silence within, shouting for his officers and commanders stationed inside. From his vantage point atop of the wagon, the driver watched as the orcs attempted to move stealthily towards the farmhouse. However, the orcs had only proceeded a few minutes before the darkness engulfed them, and he was no longer able to follow their progress. Still focused on when the last of the orcs disappeared, staring only into the nothingness of the darkness, the driver whispered a small prayer for the old man. Reason suggested alone against 4 orcs the old man would be taken prisoner again. However, there was something about the old man that caused one to question one's reasonability. The more he thought about it, the more he became certain that the orcs were no longer the hunters, but had now become the hunted and were being led into a trap. Any further thoughts he might have had were suddenly interrupted by a brilliant flash of blue light that illuminated the night sky, panicking the team of horses, causing them to bolt forward in an attempt to flee and nearly dislodging him from the wagon. Scooping up the reins, he pulled back on them hard, restraining the team from any further erratic forward movement. A full 20 minutes passed, and still no one had emerged from the darkness. Remembering that he still possessed the key to his restraints, he reached into the right side pocket of his tunic and retrieved it. Slipping the key into the lock, he released the chains that bound him to the wagon. Pausing briefly at the edge of the road, where earlier the orcs had set off in pursuit of their prisoner, he took several deep breaths, forcing himself to control the thoughts of fear that froze him in place. Gritting his teeth against the fear and vocalizing words of encouragement to himself, he stepped off the road onto the dirt path that would take him to the farmhouse. The old man did not move. He just laid there, cradled in a soft bed of tall grasses and weeds, staring up into the multitude of stars that blinked in the sky above him. The amount of strength he had to expend to successfully teleport the orcs now left him weak and unable to stand. Gasping for air, he lay there, focusing what little power he still had within him on remaining conscious. Still unable to rise, his breathing now more relaxed, a slow smile spread across his face, escalating into a full-blown fit of laughter as he thought of the fate that awaited his would-be captors. The presence of such powerful magic within the walls of the keep would not go undetected by Roan. Sensing the invasion of such strong foreign magic, Roan would easily be able to trace its source to the cell underneath the keep. The man could almost see the scene playing out in his mind. Roan ripping open the cell door only to find that those inside were the orcs that he had entrusted to escort him to a more powerful prison in his fortress. Anger and frustration would consume him. He would be unable to control his response, and before the orcs could be afforded an opportunity to speak, they would be incinerated. In time, Roan's anger would fade, and when it did, the realization that the old man was free would replace the anger with fear and panic, followed shortly by the knowledge that the old man would attempt to rescue the prisoners held in custody by his war party. The old man knew that Roan would be forced to take action to thwart any attempt he made to rescue the prisoners. However, what that action might be or how soon Roan's plan would be put into action, he could not guess. Cursing himself for the predicament, his vanity, and sending the orcs to the keep instead of simply hurling a massive fireball at the farmhouse had placed him, the old man attempted to sit up, only to discover that his lack of strength still prevented him from doing so. And it most likely would take a few more hours of recovery before he was able to muster the strength to rise. Hours he and those he sought to rescue could not spare. Resigning himself to the reality of the situation, the old man closed his eyes and drifted off into a very deep sleep. Suspended in the air, floating through the realm of dreams, the old man bore witness to a time past. Beneath him lay a meadow, abundant in plush grasses and wildflowers. The sky above was deep blue, littered with thin, wispy white clouds that, like himself, seemed to float effortlessly across the sky. The sun was at its peak, providing ample daylight and bringing warmth to the creatures within the meadow. The tranquility and the magnificence of the scene was, however, lost to the 2 younger men that stood off to one side of the meadow, each raising his voice above the other in an effort to be heard. Though he could hear the voices as they ascended in volume, the words were muffled and unclear to the old man. How long they stood there arguing was not known. Time was not measured in the dream world. Without warning, the bigger of the two men grabbed hold of the other's robe and shoved him to the ground. Pivoting to his left, he turned his back and began to walk towards the other side of the meadow. Rising from the ground, the smaller of the two produced a wand from within the folds of his robe. Aiming his wand at the back of his attacker, he unleashed a quick series of sparks. Defenseless against the sudden attack, the sparks struck the man's back, lifting him from the ground momentarily and launching him flat on his face a few yards away. A cry of pain mixed with rage erupted from the bigger man's lips as he went down. Lying there on the ground, making no effort to rise, the bigger man rolled onto his back, fire dancing between his fingertips. The flames merged in the center of the big man's palms, forming a ball of fire which was hurled in retaliation. Dropping his wand, the younger man spoke a quick incantation as his fingertips danced in the air in front of him, placing an invisible barrier between himself and the ball of flame. The ball of flame exploded against the barrier, forcing the younger man to step backwards, but did not break. The bigger man knew that the ball of flames would never reach its target. He anticipated the younger man's defensive shield being cast. However, it provided enough of a distraction that the bigger man was able to regain his footing. Floating helplessly above the two men who now stood 40 yards apart, glaring at each other with intense scowls of anger in their faces, the old man pleaded with them to walk away and to put aside their anger. He watched in horror as the bigger man once again summoned a fire that danced between his fingertips, creeping slowly to the center of his palm to fall a ball of flame that the bigger man hurled towards the younger man. As before, the ball of flame smashed into an invisible barrier, consuming what remained of it, leaving the younger man exposed. The younger man, knowing his shield could not withstand the second impact, had begun to cast an offensive attack of his own, which he now released, sending bolts of purple arcane energy at the bigger man. Aware that a counterattack would follow, the bigger man had summoned a barrier of his own, resulting in the arcane energy being absorbed by the shield before reaching its intended target. Holding the barrier in place, the bigger man commenced to recite the incantation necessary for his next attack. The attack came, this time in the form of frost bolts that shattered the barrier. Anticipating the younger man's next spell would be to resummon his barrier, the bigger man changed tactics, this time sending forth a blast of fire that erupted at the younger man's feet, scorching the earth and knocking the younger man to the ground. The younger man's shield dropped as he was thrown to the ground. The bigger man's attack having successfully achieved the desired effect, without a moment's hesitation, the bigger man hastily cast a ball of flame. The ball of flame was smaller and not as powerful as the previous one, but it sailed forth and found its target attempting to rise to his feet, hitting him in the chest, eliciting a cry of pain as it burned through the thin robe and seared the skin beneath it. The smell of burning flesh replaced the aroma of wildflowers and sweet grasses, and the bigger man knew he now held the advantage. A more powerful ball of flame and the battle would be over. However, the bigger man found himself wanting. The amount of energy he had expended thus far was beginning to take its toll, leaving him unable to summon such a spell. Forcing himself to stand, the younger man fully expected to be blown back to the ground again for the last time. Looking across the distance between himself and the bigger man, he was surprised to see the bigger man just standing there, watching him. Instinctively, the younger man attacked, the purple bolts of lightning shooting forth from his fingertips. The bigger man was slow in getting up his shield, and the first of the three bolts managed to hit the bigger man in the shoulder. Gritting his teeth against the pain, the bigger man concentrated on keeping his shield in place to protect him from the last two bolts. Tears flowed freely from the old man's eyes as he watched the battle rage on. Lightning bolts, frost bolts, and balls of flame through the afternoon with careless regard for the beauty of the meadow which now bore scars of frozen, scorched, and upturned earth. Both men were fatigued, the energy required to cast spells placing great stress on their bodies, and often they would both collapse to the ground, unable to attack or defend themselves. It was no longer a battle of skill, but a battle of willpower, with only one ending. The first thing the driver noticed as he approached the farmhouse was that the front door had been torn from its hinges and tossed into the field a few yards away. Standing on the front porch, he peered inside. He could detect no movement from inside, nor did his ears discern any sound coming from within. Cautiously, he took a tentative step across the threshold, stopping again to listen and stare into the darkness. Assured that all was quiet within, he continued through the kitchen, stepping over the upturned table and fragments of broken dishes that covered the wooden floor. He paused again, this time searching the corridor in front of him. Some of the doors off to his left and right bearing witness to the brutality of the orcs who had simply smashed through them in their search for the old man. Looking off to his left, he saw a large living space, the furniture piled against the walls, though a few pieces had been tossed into the center of the room. Burned into the floor of the room was a large circle with magical runes drawn outside the circle, no doubt the source of the brilliant blue light that had illuminated the night sky. What purpose the runes in the circle served, the driver did not know, but that it had something to do with the absence of the orcs in the area, he was certain. But what of the old man, he wondered? Had the old man vanished with the orcs? He was thinking out loud, talking to himself. No, the old man had lured the orcs here to trap them. He would not have been in the room with them, he reasoned. Scanning the walls of the room, the driver noticed there was only one window. There, he thought to himself, the old man had to be watching and waiting through that window. Had to be watching and watching through the window, waiting for the precise time to spring the trap. Sorry about that. I found the old man right outside the window. The old man was lost in a deep sleep, mumbling incoherently and moving spasmodically every few seconds. Dropping to one knee, ready to run if necessary, he reached out his left arm and, placing his palm on the old man's chest, shook him gently. The battle faded from the old man's view. He felt himself being pulled from the scene by an unknown outside force. He no longer floated effortlessly. His movements became erratic as he felt himself falling. Whatever force held him suspended in the sky was no longer there. Plummeting towards the ground beneath him, which seemed to climb upward at an incredible pace to meet him, a horrified scream on his lips, the old man suddenly opened his eyes. Reaching out with both hands, he grasped hold of the man kneeling over him. Terrified, the man tried to pull back, but the old man held on for dear life, preventing the man from standing and running away. Sucking in the cool night air, the old man relaxed his grip. His unexpected exit from the dream world had left him confused. I know you, the old man whispered as he locked eyes with the man, half kneeling and half standing above him. Yes, you do. We met a few hours ago. I was the driver of the wagon. You gave me the key to my shackles, do you remember? I do, replied the old man, nodding his head in the affirmative. Can you stand? Asked the driver. I don't know, but I think with your help I might be able to. Just give a few moments to collect my thoughts and rest. You must have been having a nightmare, the driver said as he waited. You were talking in your sleep and moving about in a fitful manner when I found you. Nightmare? No. More like a frightening vision from the past, a very horrible and terrifying vision, the old man answered. I think I'm ready now. Help me up. There's still much I have to do, and the sooner the better. Extending his hand towards the old man, who grasped it, the driver pulled the old man up, catching him in both arms before he could collapse again. They stood there together in the silence of the pre-dawn hours, in an odd sort of embrace, the driver supporting the old man, allowing him a few minutes to recover from the vertigo of suddenly being jerked upright. Do you still have your wagon and the horses? Asked the old man. I believe so, replied the driver. I left them on the road not far from here. Help me to the wagon. I will be able to rest and think while we search for those who are in need. who are in need of rescue. Rescue from whom? Asked the driver. Rojan's war party, orcs and mages that hold them prisoner while they escort them to the keep, which they must not be allowed to reach, answered the old man. I was afraid you were going to say something like that. You are in no condition to effect a rescue, my friend. Surely death will come to you if you try, cautioned the driver. Perhaps, the old man stated matter-of-factly. However, I must try. Well then, let us be on our way. We do not want to keep death waiting, the driver said, and placing the left arm of the old man about his neck, circling his right arm around the waist of the old man, together they began walking towards the road. The old man had only taken a few steps when the old man stopped and facing the driver said, If we are to die this day, my friend, I would very much like to know your name. Henry. Henry Willingsby at your service, the driver answered. And you are? Well, Henry, I have many names, but you can just call me Pops.